Welcome back to the Shared Practices podcast. It's been a little while since George and I have talked, and actually, George, you went to the Voices of Dentistry conference, right? How was that?
It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed meeting a lot of people that we hear about online and we interact with, and so it was weird meeting people. I was supposed to meet you, but I did meet Paul. We released that
I'm
episode last
sorry.
week. So should we tell our audience? I think the listeners who I saw at the conference thought it was a little hilarious that we had never actually met.
Yeah, they're like, oh, I wanted to meet Richard, which I don't even know why they'd want to meet me, but you could turn around and say, well, yeah, me too. I still have not met my business partner, so that's kind of, yeah, it's the miracle of being able to work long distance and podcasting. It all works out, but I was supposed to be there, and then family things, it just didn't work out last minute, so I'm bummed. I'll have to make it out to Phoenix some other time.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to get to know you.
Yeah, exactly. No, totally. Maybe I'll have to come out for your graduation, except I'm probably graduating about the same time, so maybe it won't work. So this episode is a special one because we've had on Hunter Smith before in the podcast, who is Will Little's partner. And so these two together, the cool thing about Hunter and Will is that they are in the middle of building this group of practices, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but they're like at the early stages, and they're like sharing everything that they're doing and everything they're going through and their whole thought process. And so Will really gets into a lot of specifics, and we've kind of gone over this before when you talked about this before with Tanner, right? Do you remember which episode that was?
Off the top of my head, I do not, but that was with Tanner Applegate, and we talked about the transition checklist, going through all the things that you have to do. And do you know, have Will and Hunter met in person?
Will and Hunter? Yeah, well, freak. They taught practices together. Just
I know, I'm just
we're
messing
weird
around.
Partners. It took me a second. I was like, well, yeah, of course they've. No, absolutely.
It's funny, though. Every time we have Hunter on the show, or Will, they have a different number of practices. Like the first time it was like 4, and then it was 6, and now they're like 10. So that's fun to see them. You know, I mean, we don't have them too far apart from each other, so it's pretty funny seeing their group grow.
No, absolutely. They're at a pretty rapid pace of growth. So, well, this first episode, we go into the pre-purchase agreement consideration. So because they buy so many practices, they're just one after another, all of this checklist leading up to purchasing and then transitioning, all of the nitty-gritty, they kind of have it down to a science, and Will really lays it out in these next 2 episodes. So it's a long one, and it's a good one. I hope you guys enjoy it. We'll dive right in. Here's the episode with Dr. Will Little. Okay, I have with us today Dr. Will Little. Dr. Little is known through our episodes with Hunter. You guys are partners, and so you've kind of been introduced a little bit, but for our listeners, kind of recap your journey into multi-practice ownership, which is pretty awesome. The rate and the amount of experience you guys have gotten in such a short period of time.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard. Appreciate you having me on. Hopefully I can provide some good content for the listeners.
Yeah.
Like I say, I've listened to a lot of the podcast, great stuff. Hopefully we can contribute some good stuff. But yeah, and also number 2, since Hunter has been on the episodes, you know, we've grown actually substantially since then.
Yeah.
So we have together 9 practices currently. And
it's crazy.
Well, looking towards our 10th on February 1st of this new year. So, and we're excited about the trajectory.
When you graduated again, because you graduated a year before Hunter, right?
I did. It's 2013 grad, University of Tennessee. You know, I got out. I don't know, stalled for a year, I guess. I mean, anyway,
in comparison to current
in comparison to what we've done.
Sure.
Yeah. I did a startup out of school, and it actually wasn't ready till about 6 months out of dental school. And
I didn't realize that. I guess I'd forgotten that you'd actually done your own startup first.
Yeah, I did. I did it for about 4 or 5 months. Then I ended up buying the practice that I currently, where I primarily practice in, and merging the startup with that practice location.
Okay, gotcha.
It was the lease terms, the beginning of that startup. Man, it was a long negotiation. It probably wasn't a good deal for me. So I had an opportunity. I was either I was going to do one of 2 things: is move out of the lease space that I had and buy a little space across the street and put that practice in there, or try to find a practice in town to merge with. and which was the best decision at that time.
Sure.
I just ended up merging that practice with another one in town that I bought that was my primary practice, and in the same town as Hunter. And at that point, about a year after I graduated, is when we started started Southern Illinois Group and really trying to work on the multi-practice deal.
So
because I graduated 13, our first practice together wasn't until October of 15. So,
oh wow.
So it was full 2 years after I graduated before we really got rolling pretty hard on it.
So you've gone from 1 or 2 in 2015 to now 9 and potentially a 10th coming up, right?
Yeah, we hit it hard, and we bought 2 on December 1st over in the same area, so
wow.
it was kind of the same place, but down the street, and it's in Memphis. One guy was 100% owner of one, 50% owner of the other, so we're going to have gone from 7 to 10 here in a couple months.
That's amazing. So we got to meet in person down in San Antonio because you and Hunter put on a course at Breakaway on acquisitions. And I took just like pages of notes on the class that you taught. And it was basically on the details of once you've found that practice, analyzed the numbers, decided it's worth pulling the trigger, sending in that offer, do your negotiating. Okay, now we're starting to close and it looks like everything's going to line up. Lending's lining up. The actual details of going from, okay, crap, I'm buying this practice. This is actually happening, to being in the practice and having things up and running. And those details, there's a lot of little things to kind of keep track of, and that it seems like no single one of them is going to make or break you. But if you forget a couple of them or you get behind on some things, it seems like it would be pretty frustrating, and things could kind of just like get hairy and hectic. And that's just part of it, I imagine, in general anyways, but even more so than needed if you don't have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. So is that a fair, is closing time as crazy as it seems to be to me, having done this many of them for you?
Ah, man, it's as crazy as it sounds like, and it is an absolute blast. That
so you like this chaos.
Oh, dude, the chaos that's what you're in it for, man.
Yeah.
Is the chaos at closing. It's it's moving parts, it's preparation, it's the practice that you've evaluated coming to fruition and it becoming yours. And for us being a part of our group, and for somebody that's going to buy one practice and practice there forever, it's their practice, man. I mean,
Sure.
It's their baby. It's what it is, so you want to get it started on the right foot. And yeah, at Breakaway, I did the seminar, and man, I had a blast putting it together because, I've really kind of referred to it because it was actually a nice thing for me to do, regardless.
Kind of put it all on paper, everything that you've been doing anyways.
Yeah, I mean, if I was going to speak on it, well, I had to sit down and organize it.
Sure.
And I needed to do that anyway. I needed to get down and set goals to what we need to have done at this point, what we need to have done at this point, the different stages, so I broke it down to pre-closing, closing, and post-closing. And I have things that need to be done pre-closing, things closing day, things post-closing. And I tried to organize it all down as more like a cookbook on what to do when you find that practice. So yeah, I'm passionate about it. And man, it's kind of my role, if we have roles, Hunter and I both do kind of everything when it comes to the practice, but he definitely does more and is better at it, more of the evaluation side of it, and the pre-closing, if you will.
Pre-closing. Okay. I like it.
Yeah. So yeah, before you even ever, before you realize it's that practice, before you realize it's your practice. And then I kind of step in once we've nailed it down. Okay, this is a good fit for us. This is a good fit for what we do. And it's kind of my responsibility to get it to closing and kind of organize it and take good care of it from the time that we decide it's a good buy to the time that we actually close it. And the first 6 months after. So
the timeline there, you kind of broke that down into 3 things. What, in your experience, has the timeline been for pre-closing versus, let's see, pre-closing, post-closing, and then, afterwards? How long is this time period from when you've kind of got an agreement on the table to when you actually close and get things wrapped up and get practicing?
Sure. And it depends on how many people are involved. Number one, if you've got attorneys and the seller has attorneys and you've got a bunch of contracts going back and forth and what brokerage you use. And who all's involved. It can be a lengthy process, especially if you've never done one and the seller's never done one.
Sure.
But probably
what's your fastest and what's your longest?
The fastest has to be this one that we're working on in February, because it's going to be an owner finance practice. So we didn't have to get it at the bank.
Cut out the banks. That makes it easier.
We used our own contracts. We didn't have, attorneys. I'm not sure if the seller's having attorneys look or not, but we went down there a couple of weeks ago, I guess now, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago, and looked at the practice, and we're gonna have it closed on February 1st. So, if everything goes according to plan. But, so it could be 6 weeks,
sure.
6 to 8 weeks, or we've had one, the 2 we closed in December, Richard, I think we went over there a year and a half ago.
Holy cow. Okay.
Probably like June. So, that was, they had, it ended up being two practices, brokerage. They had 2 or 3 lawyers want to look at everything. It had real estate attached to it that we needed to purchase too. So it's, it was a big deal, long deal. And, sometimes it takes that amount of time. So, whether it's 6 weeks or a year and a half, man, if it's the practice that you think is going to, help you as a single associate that is wanting to get into practice ownership, wanting to buy that one practice, man, if it takes a year and a half, it takes a year and a half. If the numbers are right and it's where you want to be and it's where you can see yourself practicing forever, man, stick it out, and try not to lose, try to keep communication with the seller doc and be sure everybody's on the same page and just go through the due diligence and take care of it. And if it's 6 weeks, man, it's 6 weeks. That's great. But, that's a deal. It's just, you got to do these things that need to get done. And sometimes depending on the deal, it can take way longer, or you can, if everybody's on the same page and there's not much to do, not a whole lot of paper time, maybe you can get it kicked in 6 weeks. Who knows?
Well, and the hard part is, it seems like, so for you guys, you have multiple practices that's your bread and butter. For a dentist who's going to be a solo doc owner, your current employment versus your future practice that you're closing on, that's tricky. Like, when do you tell your, doc that you're leaving and buying a practice? I think that's where having some money set aside can really help even that out for you. That
hey, for sure.
If you're dependent on the money that you're getting month to month, week to week with your current practice, it's hard to tell that doc, hey, I'm buying a practice, but you don't know when, because sometimes people might want to get rid of you right up front.
No, for sure. You got to kind of be ready for that. And once again, it's also going to depend on, how far away is that practice you're buying from the one you currently work at? Is it something you can continue to work at a couple of days while you're, getting into your practice? Is your senior doc that you're buying the practice from, is he staying? If he's staying for 6 months, maybe you can slowly get into that practice. If the one you currently work is a little bit further away, I think there's ways around that. Obviously, if you're, across the street from the practice that you're about to buy, probably you're not going to be, because you've got some sort of non-compete where you're working. But, I think that most dentists, especially practice owners, if you're not dealing with with an employer dentist that, is really kind of out of touch with what's going on, I think that he's got to realize that ownership for the associate is what's best long term. I feel that way. I tell people that all the time, even when we're recruiting associates, Hunter and I joke that we have terrible pitch to our associates, because they're like, hey, ownership's best. However, if you want to come work for us, come on, that's actually our associate recruiting method is, hey, we'll teach you how to own. Come work for us a little while if you want to. You want to
see a well-run machine.
Want to see a well-run machine? You may need to go to some other group. No, I think we do okay finally at this point. We made a lot of mistakes, but we're getting there. But it's, and hopefully our associates, when they come through us, if they work for us and they learn the importance of practice ownership and to kind of piggyback on what we were talking about just a second ago, those guys, if you're trying to find a practice, man, if it's outside your non-compete, your owner, the dentist that owns the practice that you're working at, surely he'll understand that buying this practice is going to be better for you long term, and you got to do what you can do to close the deal, for sure.
With the phases that you've got, so let's go back to the lecture you put on, because I have some notes here. Pre-closing, and I guess to summarize closing, so someone who's never closed on a house or practice, closing is when everyone shows up with like money and keys and signs things and everything changes hands.
That's the day you take the money to the bank is the day you close.
Right.
So,
or take the loan from the bank and give it to someone else.
Yeah, and you collect the money from the practice that day. That's yours. That's your money. That what goes into that practice is your money the day you close, for sure.
So that day, you want to have all your ducks in a row. So you've got different phases. So phase 1, you called pre-practice agreement signing. So this is kind of still analyzing phase. Is that fair enough to say?
Yeah. So what typically happens, everyone sometimes, and we've actually done it probably mostly this way, is that, there's an agreement whenever you buy practice. It's typically called the PPA, practice purchase agreement, or some APA, whatever, however they want to abbreviate it. But it's the agreement between you and the seller doc to buy the practice, all the terms and all that good stuff.
Sure.
It's typically signed before you actually close the practice. And within that PPA, you're going to have a closing date, probably a month, so if you're planning on physically closing and owning the practice on, say, March 1st, you're going to sign this agreement, your PPA, probably a month before that.
Okay.
And that way, within that month, you've signed the agreement, nothing's going to go awry, so you've got that time so you have a period before you sign the PPA, and then you have a period in between when you sign the practice purchase agreement and the closing. And there's things to be done in both of those stages.
So the pre PPA signing, that's like still fine tuning the negotiations.
For sure. That's when you've identified the practice. You've kind of looked at the numbers. You've identified it as a, good buy, and it's time for you to get, and the seller, you've agreed essentially to you might not have totally 100,000% agreed to your price at this point, but y'all are at least real close to a deal, and then this is, you're trying to figure out, all right, is this guy, are we sticking around? Am I buying the accounts receivable? What kind of lease terms am I going to get? What's going on with this equipment? How can I work here? Is there room for a couple docks? Is it big enough for a couple docks? What am I going to do as far as the space goes? Am I buying the building? Am I leasing it? All those things need to be taken care of. You need to know what's going on before you physically sign the PPA, because when you sign the PPA, it's pretty much a done deal. It is a done deal at that point.
So let's dive into a few of these specifically, because there were some points I had here. So seller employment, like this is your bread and butter. Like you guys bring on, we do. Or you keep on docs that are just wanting to sell, but they still want to practice. But for someone who doesn't have that as their default business model,
sure,
what would be like a deciding factor of yes, I keep on someone versus no, I don't keep on someone, and how would you structure it for someone who thinks they want to be the solo doc and just isn't sure, like, do I keep them on or not? At what size of a practice would you say yes, you do? What size do you not? And how do you like to see that structured?
It depends on a bunch of different factors. Let's just kind of start diving into a few of them. If you're going to buy a practice, old school doc, been there a long time, I would really, really, really encourage, if there's any way possible to have your seller doc stay on for a certain amount of time, at least through a hygiene cycle if you can.
Sure.
And there's certain things that that even if you have to work less days at the very beginning of it, I think it's probably better long term for the practice for that guy to be there for a certain amount of time. It's difficult for you to maintain what you've basically, what we've always preached on too, is you've got to be able to replicate the production, and that's fine. I know you ought to have already, if you listen to Hunter Talk, you've got to already have known that you can replicate the production. Yeah. However, you also need to understand that if you've got a long-standing patient base or, and fee-for-service practice, that, you're probably going to lose a few patients. I don't think it's ever as many as people think it's going to be, but at the same time, you've got to be prepared for that. And one thing you can do to mitigate that is have the guy stick around and vouch for you and try to take good care of him.
I mentioned in a previous episode that one of our biggest issues right now as young dentists and dental students is our student loan debt. It is one of the main reasons why we strive at Shared Practices to navigate the path to successful practice ownership. We aim to help our audience by doing everything we can to help you earn a great income as a dentist. It has always been my advice to tackle your student loan debt by refinancing your loans after becoming a practice owner with a stable income. Doing this allows you to avoid paying too much on your monthly interest. The key to refinancing your loans is selecting an experienced lender that will offer you a competitive interest rate. Did you know that most student loans charge the same rate regardless of how creditworthy you are? So chances are, as dentists, you're probably paying too much in monthly interest. Laurel Road, a division of Darien Rowan Bank, is a national leader in student lending. Laurel Road has helped medical professionals across the country refinance their federal and private dental school debt, saving thousands on interest over the life of their loans. Not only do they offer great terms and great service, ADA members receive an additional 0.25% rate discount on top of their new and already low rate for as long as they remain an ADA member. Fill out a 2-minute application and get pre-approved rates instantly if you are eligible. It's free to apply and there's no obligation to accept. For more information specific to your needs as a dentist and to submit an application, simply visit www.laurelroad.com/shared practices. Again, that is LAURELROAD.com/shared practices. Laurel Road is an equal housing and opportunity lender. All rates are subject to eligibility. Savings may vary. This is a paid promotion of student loan refinancing by Laurel Road.
What would be a red flag for size? Like, what would be something that if like a practice was smaller than X, Y, or Z, a certain range, then you'd be like, it'd be hard to keep someone on.
I think you've got to look at basically, I think it's a little bit more involved than that, because I think you've got to look at the percentage, what it's cash flowing.
Okay.
What can you do for it? Let's just throw an example out there. Let's say it's a $600,000 practice.
Okay.
And you're going to profit, I don't know, $200 off of it ish. What can you pay that? If you did all the dentistry, the whole 9 yards, you've already evaluated it, you're going to make $200, it's going to cash flow $200,000. Well, is it worth paying that senior doc a percentage to stick around and make, because you're going to pay him a percentage. You're going to pay him. It's part of my lecture is about my favorite pay structure is in that 30 to 40% range, depending on where you are, probably somewhere around 35% collections. So,
you call that net collections,
right? We always have the associate, whether it's senior associate, junior associate, every single associate have some kind of skin in the lab game. So we take the total collections and subtract the lab fees off the top of the collections and then do a percent off of that, so that it works out to, if you pay an associate 35%, their net collections, then you take total collections minus the lab fees and 35% of that. It works out to the associate paying 35% of their lab bill.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
And we pay 65%. Just keeps the employee, associate dentist just vested in what that lab number is. So.
So
that every crown didn't go in Arrowhead for $300 or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. There's no kind of you're aligned in terms of your financial goals and incentives. But
I'll kind of expand on that on the seller doctor just a little bit more. I'll try to be semi-concise because I don't have a ton of time and I got a lot of content. But so if you're, it's number two, it's about space. If you've got a lot of space, you can make it work. I don't even know that there's a number that makes sense. Yeah, if it's a 3 operatory practice, you got 1 hygiene room and 2 doctor rooms. I mean, y'all can't work there at the same time.
Sure.
I don't care what there is. I don't care what you're doing. The only structure that you're going to be able to make that work is if y'all split your days and you're working and you're finishing up your associateship, down the road. You come in, work 2 days. He works 2 days for a hygiene cycle. And then he goes after that, because y'all can never work at the same time because just from space.
But is that a bad thing if you're not working at the same time? Because even if you had more space, like you could still do that hour split.
You for sure could. I think that the best structure is not working at the same time. It's just that most people want to work the hours. I mean, the proper hours. I mean, what do I think you should do when you buy practice? I mean, what I think you should do is go in and you should have late hours. You're a new doctor there. You want to go in. You want to make your practice marketable. So what I would do is let your owner doc work. If he's been working 4 days, let's see if he'll work 3 days. And you go work Tuesday till 10 to 7, Wednesday 10 to 7. You work Fridays, and y'all work together on Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, and Thursday. He works by himself Monday, and you work by yourself Friday.
Sure.
So now you've just made your office more marketable. If it's If it's a your typical 8 to 5 Monday through Thursday dental office, you go in and get late hours and work Fridays and watch the practice. I mean, just ask Hunter. It's what he did when he bought his practice originally. I mean, that practice went up. It's that exact structure. I mean, he went in and worked late hours and Fridays, and all of a sudden that practice, spiked, $300,000 or so $100,000. So,
well, it seems like the hour split justifies keeping someone on because there's two people producing more hours. So it's, you don't have to just replicate. You can actually grow from doing that.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think it's really good for the practice. Number two, especially if your seller doc is doing specialty procedures, you want to keep him around doing those as long as humanly possible. I mean, if you've got a guy that just he does a lot of molar endo, really enjoys it. I mean, please try to come up with some sort of structure where you can come in and do molar endo for you, especially if it's not something you're good at, or
and you're not biased at all in this because you're the molar endo guy right now.
Exactly. Yeah. So please keep somebody around to do molar endo so you don't have to.
Right.
No, it's but even if you're pretty good at it, even if it's a passion of yours a little bit, if you can get that seller doctor stick around, do endo while he's there, check some hygiene, vouch for you, just be around the practice, just be around that practice, especially if it's a fee for service practice where you get lots of long-term patients. If it's a large new patient practice with, that takes tons of PPOs and it's more of a volume based model that doesn't do a lot of specialty procedures, you'll have better, you won't have near as much turnover in your patient base when you walk in as opposed to the seller. But
okay,
that's another factor is fee, how long have these patients been there? How long has the doctor been there? How long has the practice been there? If all those things, fee for service, been there 30 years, he's been there 30 years, aging practice, that's when it's going to be more important for him to stick around. If it's if you're seeing 110 new patients a month and you take, every PPO, which is fine. I mean, that's a fine model. That's great. It's just a different one.
Yeah, no.
And then it's probably less important who the actual doctor is at that point.
Well, we just did 3 episodes, or we're releasing 3 episodes on fee-for-service transitions, and I think absolutely that factors in that split and how long you keep someone on. So that was really great. So I really liked the net collections with the lab fee in there, the hour split, size of the practice, keeping on the specialty procedures. I feel like those are some good takeaways there.
For sure.
With accounts receivable, so you mentioned that. So just explain real quick for the dental school student who's listening to the show, what is accounts receivable and why does that matter when you're acquiring a practice? And then how do you win accounts receivable buying someone's account receivable?
So we typically do not buy the accounts receivable of the practice, and accounts receivable is all the money that's going to be owed to that seller doc, that seller entity, that practice before you buy it. Because you're going to have, let's say it collects $100,000 a month. I mean, even the best practices in the country are going to have at least half a month of AR out there, or at least real close to a half month of AR. So, I mean, if you typically collect $100,000 in a month and you're going to have 40 to 50, more than that. I mean, some will have closer to 100, but especially in the ones that haven't been watched as closely, but you'll have $40,000-$50,000 that we expect. If you just shut the doors and did no more dentistry, you expect that much money to come in, through patient payments and mostly insurance.
So
you've got to figure out what to do.
Done. The patients are just taking their time to pay you for whatever reason.
Well, and a lot of times you'll run into practices where, especially a lot of these older practices where the patients never paid on the way out. I mean, they were billed. I mean, you walk out and then, say, hey, I'll bill you.
Statement.
Let's get a statement and send in the money. And once again, it's not the way we choose to do it. Not to say that that's the wrong thing to do. I personally don't do it. I think payment when service is rendered decreases all the other.
No, I'll come out saying on the show, I think that's the wrong thing to do.
That's the wrong thing to do. But it's if you
it's
do
how
that,
it used to work. It doesn't work that way anymore.
It used to work, man. Yeah, it doesn't work that way anymore. It's just a new age, I suppose. But a lot of practices still do it. A lot of the practices that you'll evaluate and looking at, it's like, well, where's the money? Why is there so much AR? Because nobody pays on the way out.
Yeah.
Well, so you look up and you got, tons of AR out there, tons of accounts receivable out there, and you got to change, and then you got to change the way they collect payments. And all of a sudden, what do we do with this money that's coming in? Well, there's 2 ways to deal with it. You can buy it, number one.
So basically,
you can not
like
buy it.
It's almost like you're buying theoretical future money. So it's like, okay, this much money is owed to the practice right now at this closing date. And I'm going to pay, so say that there's $50,000 in AR what percentage of that are you going to pay? So you have to pay 20,000, 30,000 for that future potential 50,000 that can come into the practice. What percentages do people pay for that?
Yeah, so it depends. Number one, if it's PPO practice and you're expecting insurance write-offs. If it's an entire fee-for-service practice, you expect to get it all, right? That plays into it. So what you want to take into account, you're going to want to look at the kind of the historical collections of the practice. Are they collecting 85, 90% of what they produce? Are they collecting most all of it? But typically a structure that we like to do if you're going to buy the AR that tends to work regardless of the practice is 90% for 0 to 30 days, 60% for 30 to 60 days out, and 30%, for 60 to 90 days out. So when more explained there, if you did the work from, if the work was done a week before you bought the practice and you don't have the money yet, well, that's to be expected. You hadn't got the insurance yet.
Sure.
There's a very, very, very high probability that you're going to get that money into the practice. It just hadn't got collected yet. So we pay a premium for those accounts.
So the fresh accounts receivable is worth more. Right. You'd say like 90% is what you said?
90% is typical, I think, for those 0 to 30 days. And then 30 to 60 days, you're like, what's going on here? Right. Why is it 30 to 60 days? If it gets to this point, something has happened. A patient hadn't sent in money on a statement. Insurance has denied the claim once. Why do we have these out here 30 to 60 days? So we only, those are going to be at a deducted rate, somewhere in that 60% ballpark is kind of where I would feel comfortable. And these aren't hard and fast rules. It's where I'd feel comfortable paying, and then, when you get out to 60, 90 days, you just don't expect that money. You don't, 30, 60, 90 days, if, you're expecting very little of that money. So I say 30% even with a hesitation, because, if that 60 to 90 days, man, it is going to be tough for you to collect very much of that, because typically something has happened to where you're not going to collect it. Anything over 90 days, there's no point. There's no point paying for. The bank won't let you basically finance anything, an accounts receivable that's over that's over 90 days. So, so what
how much does the bank play into these? Like, because you're taking money from your loan and paying for this future potential income. Do they care the percentages other than that over 90 days? Do they care about what you're buying this for?
Well, they might care, but they shouldn't. And here's why. Number one, you're going to have to do one of two things typically when you buy practice, unless you buy one that cash flows super quick. You're going to have a line of credit, because unless you have, cash reserves built up, you're going to have some sort of working line of credit, because, the first day you buy the practice, you're going to have to pay rent. You're going to have to pay, $4,000 or $5,000 rent if it's a larger structure, even more. We have a facility that we pay over $10,000 in rent for.
Wow.
So you're going to have that day one. You're going to have a payroll of your employee, for your employees, I don't know, mid-month, first 2 weeks. It's going to be semi-large for an existing practice. You're not going to have any money coming in yet, especially if it's an insurance-driven practice. it may take 6 weeks before you get, 4 to 6 weeks before you get your first, payment from an insurance company, especially from the hygiene side. You're going to have some money at the beginning. Buying the accounts receivable is a good way to get that early cash flow, to where you don't, because if you buy the accounts receivable, you won't have to have a line of credit. So your bank is typically going to have to do one of those things. You're either going to have to buy the accounts receivable, or you're going to have a line of credit to front it, because all that money, the first week you buy the practice is nearly 100% AR, nearly 100% accounts receivable. You're going to turn around and give to the seller doc. So.
Okay. So that instant cash flow of like, this dentistry has been produced and we're getting the money from that dentistry, versus the old doc wants to collect all of the money that he produced and doesn't want to sell the accounts receivable. It's just a more awkward transition where you're like, okay, we've got bills to pay and no money to pay it with.
Right. You just got to have a line of credit, some kind of way, obviously some way to pay your bills.
Sure.
But, I think that accounts receivable, if the owner doc's going to stay around for a period of time, it's easier to not buy the AR because they're in the practice. There's going to be some check exchanging involved with the accounts receivable, because I think the best structure is for you to take all the accounts receivable, you put it in, your new entity, your business's bank account, because that way you can track it. Your front office posts it, they hand you the check, even if it's written to your previous doc, you put it in your bank account. And then at the mid-month and the end of the month, you take that money that was accounts receivable and then give it to him.
Okay.
And that way, and that way, you've accounted for all the AR. It all went in your bank account, and then when you pay it back out. So that way, every dollar you pay out is tracked. You can take the accounts receivable before the sale, take how much you've given your seller doc over time. You can see kind of how much is to be expected in the future.
Well, and I think you guys made the point too of when I was there in person, that saying the idea that if they're doing the accounts receivable themselves and that you haven't set it up like you just described, that means someone's going to have to like come in and have access to the books and like be receiving checks in their name. And it's just kind of a messier transition.
And if you end up, I'm not saying every transition is going to be rosy red. I mean, if you have a transition where it's hard negotiated and there's kind of some hurt feelings and the seller doc or whatever maybe doesn't want to leave, or maybe you're pushing because there's not space. And hey, man, this is a small practice. I mean, you've got to go. I've got to produce the dentistry here because it's not large enough for me to pay you. It's not going to cash flow. So you got to go. And it's kind of a sour grapes end. I mean, I wouldn't recommend, buying a practice like that necessarily unless it's
burn the goodwill.
But it may be the one, you know, and it may be a great location for you. It may be a practice that you can see yourself at forever, and it may have all started on good terms, and all of a sudden it's not. It may be best to buy the accounts receivable, just to go ahead and get that done. That way it's over with. All the money's yours. Every dollar that comes into the practice is yours. So that's the two big advantages are A, the money's yours. Obviously every single dollar, so you have cash flow. Number two, the advantage is to totally, rid yourself of having to write checks to the seller doc. That relationship from the money exchanging standpoint is over. He can't, say, hey, what's going on with my accounts receivable? I don't feel like you're doing a good enough job trying to collect it for me, because kind of part of your responsibility is you're using your front office staff to help collect his accounts receivable, and that's fine. If he's helping you with the practice, especially if he's in the practice, every day and talking you up and in the hygiene department, helping your office produce, and you'll gladly collect his AR for him. But if not, then it's a strain on your employees to try to collect it for him, and they're going to be making calls and sending statements and all that good stuff. So you can definitely benefit by buying. Also, you also got to think you have to you're not going to typically buy it outright, so you're going to have to finance it. So you're going to be paying interest on it. So if you're going to buy the accounts receivable, and you might lose. We might, our 90-60-30 isn't just the hard and fast rule. So if you buy the accounts receivable for, $30,000 and you don't collect all $30,000 and you're paying interest on it, you may lose money on the deal.
You made a gamble and it did not pay out perfectly.
Made a gamble that did not pay off. So, and with AR, you just don't know. You're going to make your best guess. And,
sure.
And, if you win, hey, great. If you don't, you don't. But, I would suggest having another reason whether you buy the accounts receivable versus just trying to make money, because, if you're trying to make money, that's fine, but you just don't know. It's like you said, it's just a gamble. So if you're going to buy the accounts receivable, let's let it be for a reason. For early cash flow is great. And that's probably the best reason to have day one cash flow. All the money's yours, and you don't have to worry about getting a working line of credit. As long as you have a plan to pay that accounts receivable back, have it earmarked, as you profit a little bit, pay that off so that you're not sitting there paying 5 to 6% interest on the accounts receivable that you actually collected, 5 to 6, 7, 8 years down the road.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Well, cool. That's perfect. And I think we kind of went in deep in the kind of the nitty gritty of negotiating that, which is exactly what I wanted. So that was perfect.
As we wrap up season 2 of the Shared Practices podcast and conclude our discussion about acquisitions, I wanted to share a project that I've been working on for quite some time. A lot of the experiences that I've been able to share on the podcast are a direct result of people who have been reaching out to me for the last couple years with help finding, analyzing, and ultimately getting into practice ownership. I've learned a ton from these experiences, and I've had the great fortune of looking at hundreds of dental practices for sale. Now, something that I have been working on is an ebook to chronicle my experience and some of the key lessons that I've learned, and ultimately designed and created the Ownership Accelerator. I think it's through these people's experiences that you can really see a lot of the things that go into an acquisition, maybe behind the scenes or from my perspective. And so today I'm excited to announce the release of my ebook, Keys to Buying the Right Dental Practice, explained using real stories with real buyers. I go through each chapter talking about a specific experience I had with the buyer and the lesson that relates to the process of buying a dental practice. In the 9th chapter, I talk about how to start your career off on the right foot and ultimately the genesis of the Ownership Accelerator. I think it's a great read and it's very candid through my own perspective on my experiences dealing with buyers, and you'll be able to see a little bit how it works on the back end, me getting emails, my thoughts as I'm going through it, and I try to be as open and honest as possible while still preserving the buyers involved confidentiality. They've all agreed to share their experiences, and so I'm super excited to announce the release of my ebook. If you want to download it, you can download it for free at book.sharedpractices.com. Again, that is book.sharedpractices.com. I'm super excited, and I hope you download a copy and read my book, Keys to Buying the Right Dental Practice, explained using real stories with real buyers. I'll go ahead and leave a link in the show notes.
Lease negotiations, we've kind of done a couple episodes on that, but I really liked the points that you made about just right of first refusal or option to purchase. So it's like,
sure,
if the real estate comes up down the line, you want to have one of those two in your lease term and make sure that that's defined so that it doesn't get swept out from underneath you.
Yeah, I'm not a lease. I don't know a whole ton about it. I'm sure you've had guests that know a lot more about it than I will. So I'll kind of be brief on this just to give the listeners a little introduction into what I'm looking for when it comes to lease negotiations. The first thing that I care about is you need to look and see if it's triple net lease. That means triple net lease means you're paying property taxes and insurance. That's not standard in dentistry. And, I'm not saying it's a deal killer necessarily, but you just need to know if it's in there, if it works for you. And I would shy away from leases that have you paying property taxes and insurance, because those are variable. Those things may go up, and it'd be a detriment to your practice. So
I know a guy downtown Phoenix who had his practice. He bought the real estate, and it went up to like $20,000 a year of property taxes from like a couple grand.
Yeah, Lord have mercy.
Yeah, so he was not happy about the change in property taxes. So how many of your leases are triple net versus not triple net?
We have 0 triple nets.
Nice.
We pay no property taxes for any of these places.
That's great
that we own practices. So we've been fortunate there. So they've just really never. The only one we've ever been presented. We've only been presented with one. Huh. And we just basically said no.
No, we're not going to do that.
No, thanks. It like I say, it's a variable thing. So you want to pay your rent every month, and at the 5-year mark, it's probably going to go up a little bit,
sure,
and that's fine. But man, you definitely don't want a situation like that where you look up and your property taxes skyrocket, and all of a sudden your beautiful 5%, your profit and loss used to say 5% to rent, and all of a sudden now it says 8%. And
sure, so the stability is worth it. And no, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool.
And then also, right of first refusal, option to purchase. I'll be kind of brief on these as well, but it's you just need to know what these things mean. An option to purchase means you have the option to buy the real estate at any point. If you decide, wake up on Monday morning and say, you know what, I think I want to buy this building, you can walk up to the owner and say, hey, I'm gonna buy it, and you and the seller get an appraisal and take the average of the two. Typically, that's the purchase price, and he's required to sell when you want it.
That seems a little harder to get in the lease.
Yeah. Typically an option to purchase is a guy that wanted to sell the real estate to begin with. And you're like, man, I really can't buy it.
I can't do it right now, but later.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, hey, that's fine. Just put an option to purchase in there. You can get it when you want it. He'll take rent till then. Huh. The more common is the right of first refusal, meaning that if the seller gets a written offer, while you're in your lease, you have the option to match the offer and purchase the real estate. So obviously you just want, you want control. I mean, you want to be able to say yes or no. Even if you say no, if the owner says, hey, look, I've got an offer to sell this piece of property to an investor, he's going to pay X amount. You want to have the option to say yes or no. That's what you want. That way, you have the say in who owns that building. You have the say in whether it's you or not. So.
Okay.
Just pay attention to that triple net, pay attention to property taxes and insurance on those. Be sure that, if you can, be sure that you're not going to be on the hook for property tax and insurance, and be sure you got, an option to purchase or right of first refusal. I mean, you can have both in there, but you really only need one of them. But, have one of those in there, more common right of first refusal, just so you're protected on those fronts.
Okay, perfect. The last item on the list here for the pre-practice agreement signing phase was the equipment and IT. So do you have any experiences where this kind of burned you, or have you guys been able to handle this pretty well? It seems like it could be just one of those things that, like, you think you've got it under control, and then like the computer, something's weird about the computer. Like what are your recommendations here?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. The reason I kind of put this in there is you read on Dental Town all the time. Well, if I buy this practice, I'm going to have to upgrade it. Whatever. I'm going to have to. Okay. Well, what happened the day before you bought the practice?
They did dentistry.
Somebody practiced there.
Right.
I mean, so you can practice there. Okay. I mean, so we want to avoid, to me, you want to avoid upgrading the dental equipment day one. I mean, you don't need to go in there and buy new chairs and now IT is slightly different, but I'm talking dental equipment, chairs, cabinetry. I mean, these things, you walk in, it may be kind of a dingy office. I mean, but dude, I mean, you don't have to do that day one. I mean, you're buying the practice because it cash flows already.
Right.
I mean, you don't have to walk in there and do all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, you can, but I just don't know that that's the best way to do it. I personally don't believe it is. See, I remember Scott saying a breakaway that, hey, if he bought your practice, he would close it down and renovate it. Well, I just don't believe that. I think that keeping your cash flow day one, just keep it rolling, build it. If you want to upgrade, that's fine, but just build up that cash flow and use your money. Build up your cash flow and then take your money and upgrade. Take your money and upgrade. Now, when it comes to IT, I don't necessarily believe that. I think that if you're dealing with, old IT, out of date practice management software, even a software that you just don't want to deal with. I mean, if we see a practice that's got soft dent, we're just not dealing with it. We're changing it to open dental. I mean, that's just the bottom line. So, you want to be sure that your server, your Windows versions, your practice management software, your X-ray software is something that is, at least up and running and good. You know how to use it. You know what's going on. You got daily backups that are being ran, being verified. All those things, go into it. So yeah, if you've got old Windows, XP computers, and old version of Dentrix, maybe in your best interest to drop some money, or even put it in the loan or a line of credit or something for you to get new computers, so you can feel good about your IT situation when you walk in. So I would say even if it's a fairly updated version of the software, man, it's rolling fine. Digital X-rays. I mean, even if it's film X-rays, man. I mean, you can take film X-rays for a little while. I mean, I don't want to look at them forever, but I mean, a couple months is all it takes to build up enough cash flow to buy you a sensor. And that way you don't have to borrow the money. That way you don't have to look up later down the road and be paying interest on it. So, and you've been in the practice, you've transitioned it, you've got these things done. Now you've got actual real cash flow money. Then do with it what you want, and plus it, man, how it is, working capital, bank loan money. I mean, all of a sudden it doesn't feel like, it feels like monopoly money at that point. When you have your own money, your own cash flow, your own blood, sweat, and tears in the bank account, it's, then you really realize
you
what
produce that dentistry, the cost of that money.
If it's important to you, if it's enough importance to you that you want to go buy whatever piece of equipment is, by golly, have at it, because hey, you made it, man. I mean, go buy it, but you're not using monopoly money. You're making good decisions at that point. So.
That's great. And I love that kind of just hold off on the equipment for the most part, maybe sensors if you're going to do that, but even that you could wait. But the idea that IT is worth upgrading day one, I think is a great takeaway. And Open Dental seems to be like the blue sky bio of dental office software, because it's just like the people who use it and understand it and like realize like, holy crap, this is kind of the best that there is to offer. And the price point is phenomenal. Is Open Dental like free, or is there like a little maintenance fee to it? I can't remember.
Yeah, it's $169 a month, I think, for the first 6 months, and then like $109 a month after that.
Yeah, so basically free in terms of dental software.
Basically free. I'm sorry to Open Dental if I misquoted it, but it's I think that it's round about that. It was originally $159.99, but I think they went up the whole $10 a month for the service they provide. It's an excellent software. I think it's head and shoulders above all the rest of them. I mean, I don't even think it's close. I mean, you've got Open Dental, and then you've got the rest of them. Actually, you've got Open Dental, and then like way down there, you've got Dentrix, and then below that, you've got the rest of them. So, Dentrix is just good enough that I don't feel like when I buy a Dentrix practice that I have to go in and switch the software right away,
right,
and really shock the staff. It's just good enough to where I don't want to deal with that pain yet. But the rest of them are. The rest of them are bad enough that you need to switch remote. You need to switch to Open Dental and just do it. But and I will. One thing I kind of forgot to mention about the IT and buying things number one, you absolutely day one without question need an intraoral camera in every operatory. So, and even if you're using film X-rays, that's fine, but you need to get a laptop or iPad or something where you can get an IO camera in there in every single room to be able to take pictures. That's one piece of equipment that you have to. And I just think in this day and age, you have to practice with. I mean, if you don't have an intraoral camera, I don't think you're doing enough as far as patient education. So,
no, absolutely.
Anyway, I'll quit there.
And we've had a guest. We had Derek Williams on who talked about the eBay ones that he bought and just a little simple tablet. And right there, he saw a huge increase in case acceptance and patients just kind of being on board with treatment. So,
hey, you have what, 8 operatories of intraoral cameras for less than $1,000? You get them things for like $100 a piece or so. Sure.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think we might have to split this into 3 because we've been trying to keep these a little bit shorter. I tend to let our guests just go on and on because I love this. Like this is all really specific information that you just can't find anywhere. So okay if we split this up a few more ways?
No, that's fantastic, man. Like I say, I'm probably long-winded, and I know I went long at the seminar. So, man, hey, I'll split it up as long as people will listen to me. I'll be, and hopefully I'm providing good enough content. I'd love to do it as long as you'll have me.
Awesome. No, I love it. This is perfect. So, okay, cool. We're going to wrap this up. That was phase 1 of pre-practice agreement signing. So the next episode, we're going to have phase 2, which is post-practice agreement signing. And we'll see if we can get through closing there. So thanks for coming on the show, and we'll have you back next week.
Hey, thanks, Richard. Appreciate it.
Okay. Welcome back, you guys. That was some great content from Will. Once again, I feel like it was just a pure download of information from either Hunter or Will. They do the same thing, just kind of one thing after another. So what for you was a major takeaway there?
Well, I think, when we have a guest who's talking about the same thing as we had another guest, Tanner, talk about, I try to think about what was one thing that you guys talked about that wasn't discussed in that episode. And I felt like something that Will and Hunter do that Tanner doesn't necessarily will talk about as much is the sellers thing on. And I thought that was a really nice discussion that you and Will had about, how long they should stay, what size practice. And I think that added a lot of value. And it really related to my acquisition because, I'll be keeping my seller on. So I thought that was a great discussion.
No, for sure. And there's definitely 2 camps of never keep the seller on. And Will and Hunter are fully in the always keep the seller on if you can, and it works out. So it was great to kind of get his perspective on that a little bit more in this episode. So we're going to have him back next week. So if you liked Will Little, just stick around, listen next week, and we'll talk to you guys next week on the Shared Practices podcast.